Warhammer world is a dangerous place, with all manner of terrifying creatures and malevolent races. Across the globe, there are the warrens of the devious and genocidal Skaven. Led by the Council of 13, they dream of nothing less than world domination. In the deserts of Nekahara, there are the proud and once mighty Tomb Kings, whose lust for power has increased over the centuries of their own death. In the eastern steppes, we find the innumerable hordes of the Hobgoblin Khanate, who raid trade caravans and villages along the borders of Grand Cathay. And to the far north, past the Chaos Wastes, in a dimension where few mortals dare to venture, we find the forces of Chaos, creatures of unspeakable evil who serve their gods in the eternal struggle. In a world full of such threats, strong defences are not a luxury, but a necessity if you wish to guard the safety of your people. Across the old world, the empires of men have created large castles and fortresses to keep the forces of evil at bay. But even the most impressive of structures, built by the Bretonnians or the Empire, pale in comparison to the scale and wonder of the Great Bastion. In the trailer for Warhammer 3, when the map of Grand Cathay is revealed, the Great Bastion can clearly be seen to the north. This means it will appear in the campaign map, but how might it be implemented? Will it just be a part of the map for show? Will the player be able to interact with it in any way? Well, before we get to that, let's just take a look at what the Great Bastion is. On the northern reaches of the lands of Cathay, its mighty walls stretch across the horizon for hundreds of miles. It is the largest single structure known to exist, a feat of engineering that even the dwarves would be impressed by. The Great Bastion was built many centuries ago, commissioned by the Dragon Emperor, who united the people of Grand Cathay with a singular purpose. The construction of the impressive fortress took less than a century, and its completion changed the destiny of the nation forever. Before the construction of the Great Bastion, Cathay suffered constant incursions by the Hobgoblin Khanate and the forces of Chaos, ravaging the lands and slaughtering or enslaving the people. The armies of Grand Cathay would of course push back these incursions, but the peace would never last long. Desperate to help his people and to safeguard his empire, the Dragon Emperor ordered the construction of a great wall to fortify their northern border. The bastion stands 1/4 mile high, starting from Nangao in the west at the Mountains of Morn, all the way to the Bay of Chek Kun or the Gulf of Cathay in the far east. It is able to hold a garrison of tens of thousands of men, though the Imperial Army rarely stations such numbers at the bastion, as the Empire of Grand Cathay is vast and there are other threats, both external and internal, that require the army's attention. When fully manned, it is said that the fortress walls are impenetrable, and even the largest of beasts or chaos demons are unable to break down the wall. It would take an army, the likes of which the world has never seen, to penetrate the defences of the great fortress. There are, however, some parts of the bastion that have been damaged by earthquakes. In the year 1310, a series of massive quakes struck to the west and north of the lands of Grand Cathay, causing some isolated parts of the fortress to collapse. This opened up the lands of Cathay to an invasion by the Kurgan, tribes of barbarian men from the north that roam parts of the eastern steppes. The forces of Chaos were also eager to take advantage of the breach in the wall, and hordes of Chaos warriors poured through. The invaders were met by the Imperial Army, and legion upon legion of terracotta automatons. It was a long and bloody battle, but in the end, the Imperial Army forced the forces of Chaos back into the steppes, but not before vast portions of the Empire had been ravaged by the incursion. The Empire of Grand Cathay continues to repair the collapsed sections of the Great Bastion to this day, and the Imperial Army maintains several constant patrols of the regions, ready to defend the Empire from the dangers that dwell to the north. So in the lore, the Great Bastion is an impenetrable fortress that spans the northern border of Grand Cathay, but there are several breaches that are being repaired. So how would Creative Assembly represent this in the game? I see a number of possible options for its implementation. Firstly, there is the simplest, and for the player, the most underwhelming. The Great Bastion is nothing more than a structure on the map, much like the Pillar of Bones in the Badlands. It would be purely aesthetic, and the player would not be able to interact with it in any way. If Creative Assembly were to take this route, then it would be a great disappointment. Do I think that's likely? No. The Great Bastion is too integral to the defense of Grand Cathay to just have it sitting in the background, taunting the player with dreams of what might have been. So what's the second option? Well, Creative Assembly add the Great Bastion as a single fortress, acting much like one of the gates to the inner circle of Ulthuan. It would allow the player to live out the fantasy of defending the Great Wall from hordes of hobgoblins and chaos demons, and would add an element of management, as the player would have to maintain the wall and build up additional defences. The major issue I see with this approach is that the Great Bastion is vast, stretching across a large portion of the Game 3 map, so having a single fortress that can be attacked from anywhere across that span, be forced to a singular location for the battles, would seem out of place. This approach would also limit gameplay possibilities, with the player assaulting the Bastion and able to play strategically and concentrate their forces on a weaker or damaged section of the wall. Are we likely to get this implementation? Well, it depends. If the Great Bastion on the map is not so great and is a relatively small structure, then we are likely to see this approach. If the Great Bastion stays true to the lore and spans a good portion of the map to the north of Cathay, then I don't think Creative Assembly would limit the player to a single settlement for the Bastion. If we look closely at the Great Bastion represented on the map revealed in the Game 3 trailer, then we can see the portion of the Bastion near Nangao, but we don't see exactly how long it is, as the rest of the wall is covered by a book. Based on this map, I think we will see a larger structure, more true to the lore. Option 3. The Great Bastion is a series of fortresses across the northern border of Grand Cathay, with each fortress acting like the gates to the inner circle of Ulthuan. This approach would fulfill the fantasy of defending the Great Wall from the hordes to the north, and would give the player several challenges as they have to maintain important sections of the Bastion. It also allows for players assaulting the Bastion to play strategically, choosing the sections to attack, and not being forced into a battle at the same location no matter their position along the wall. So how might the Bastion be split? Well, the section at Nangao would contain the Tower of Ashasher, which looks over the Silk Road and the winding passes through the Mountains of Morn. This part of the Bastion would have the player focusing on building up the tower and watching out for enemies coming through the mountain passes. Its battle map would see it nestled against the mountains, with the tower as a focus, as it provides several buffs for the defenders, and having the tower fall to the attacking force would deal a great blow to the defenders winning the battle. To the far east, a similar outpost would be found, though instead of overlooking the mountains, it would possibly stand watch over attacks from the coast, if the Game 3 map extends that far east, of course. Its battle map could see the port as the focus of the battle, which may be the closest we come to naval combat in Game 3. Any change over the standard fare of breach the walls and take the town square would be a nice change. So what about all the space in between? Well, there would undoubtedly be several towers along the wall which could be used as focal points and act as fortresses that the player has to maintain. We also have the breached sections, which could be represented with settlements with no buildings or walls, and the player has to build up the settlements to repair the Bastion and seal the gap. The changes to the wall from these settlements will be reflected on the campaign map as the Great Bastion is restored to its former glory. The restoration of the Great Bastion could even be integrated into the campaign goals for the Cathayan factions. So how likely is this option? I think very likely, as it will give us a Great Bastion close to the lore, open up several opportunities for strategic gameplay, and satisfy a great number of fans who dream of holding back the tides of chaos with more than just a staunch line of spears. If Creative Assembly take this approach, then I think we will have to have at least 4 or 5 different battle maps to represent the sections along the wall. There will be the Tower of Ashasher, the port on the Bay of Chekhun, 1 or 2 standard sections of the Great Bastion, and a map for the sections that were destroyed by the earthquakes. If we were to get a single battle map that represented the Great Bastion, no matter which part of it you were attacking, I would be extremely disappointed. Game 3 has been in development for quite some time, and I would hope that at least some of that time has been used to make battle maps more varied and enjoyable as part of the Siege rework that has been promised. Well, there you have my thoughts on the Great Bastion and how it might be implemented in Warhammer 3. What are your thoughts on how this iconic part of Grand Cathay will be featured? Please take a moment to leave a like or a comment, as the engagement will really help the channel, as YouTube will push this video out to more people. If you are not subscribed, then why not consider doing so? I create several new Warhammer videos each week on a variety of topics, so there's a good chance you will find something of interest. If you enjoy mods, then this is the channel for you, as not only do I feature mod spotlights and discussions on game mechanics, but I have started up a tutorial series on modding custom user interfaces into Warhammer 2, and I create my own mods which are available on the Steam Workshop. My latest creation is the Hammer of Grugni, which adds several new mechanics for the dwarves, each represented with fully custom UIs. Version 1.0.2 is currently on the workshop, which introduced bonuses when playing with Cataf's Norse dwarfs or Elon's Greybeard prospectors. Why not check it out and add a bit of flavour to your next Dowie campaign? As always, I'd like to end the video with a shout out to my patrons. Thanks for the continued support. I am humbled that you choose to help my small channel. A special thanks to Hot Apple Pie, who has been with the channel from the early days, and I'd also like to welcome my latest patron, Cody Bonds, whose own YouTube channel is one of my favourites. He has a real talent for making history come alive, and he looks remarkably like the King of Sparta. I'm Grey Tiger. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video.